Stakeholder.
In gambling, an independent party with whom each of those who make a wager deposits the money or counters wager.
A person with an interest or concern in something, especially a business.
In emergency management, any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival and recovery of a given community. You.
Welcome to Stakeholder Prepping.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you, yes, you, are the stakeholder in your own survival. We are your hosts. My name is Chris.
And I'm AC. And today, we're talking about guns.
Hoot, hoot.
We don't do this a lot. We've specifically said we don't want to talk about guns because that's just a thing that a billion other Doomcasts talk about all the time. But we have had a lot of people say that they liked our first gun episode, which was our pistol episode. So we are going to talk a little theory and stuff, but basically we're going to talk about some long-range shooting. This is kind of like the long-range rifle episode, and this is the tips and tricks and techs and, you know, the things maybe that you don't think about with long-range shooting. And hopefully, if you are someone who does a lot of long-range shooting, has taken classes in long-range shooting, hopefully there still is something in this episode that you learn and take away. Because both Chris and I have some experience in this. I have done some shooting schools, and I really do enjoy shooting long range. And I have a rifle that I have spent an embarrassing amount of money on to go out and, you know, poke holes in stuff at thousands of yards. So we're going to talk about some suppressors and bullet grain weight effects and MRAD versus MOA scope systems and some of our favorite long-range shooting tips and some budget-friendly shooting hacks as well. So, Chris, I think before we get started, though, can we talk about what episode is this? 49?
This is, holy crap, this is 49.
Is it? We've been doing this 49 weeks in a row, which is insane. And we're coming up on 52. So we are coming up on a year of us doing this. So I think 52 is going to be a fun, user shout out, listener update episode thing. Well, I think we could give away some fun stuff and things like that if you're okay with it.
I'm definitely game. And yeah, 52 episodes, that's a whole year. I know on 26, when we hit 6 months, we did a Q&A episode, and we got a lot of feedback and a lot of questions, and we would love to hear more. So if you want to hear us answer your question or address something that you have brought up, just send us an email, stakeholderprepping@gmail.com, and if it makes the cut, we'll answer it on the episode. If it doesn't, we'll send you an email back. And I think we can definitely make this happen and continue to happen year after year after year. Because AC, did you see that we just got picked up by the Associated Press?
That was kind of cool. There was a press release that went out, and that got picked up by, I think it was like 400 different news outlets. It was pretty cool. It was written pretty well. They got a quote off of me for it. So yeah, that was really cool. And hopefully we get some traction and some lift out of that. But for the listeners, for the people listening right now, if you have a question for us or any of our guests, because we could get in touch with all of them, or if you have a cool story, something you've learned from the podcast, or just maybe like your favorite moment or the things you like us to talk about, or comments, questions, concerns, any of that stuff, please send us an email. And the best ones, whether they're questions or comments or your story about maybe how the podcast helped you survive a zombie apocalypse somewhere or whatever, tell us about that. And the best one, we'll get some cool stuff. We have some actually really cool stuff. I've got hundreds of dollars worth of Grim stuff I'd like to give away. And we've got a couple of t-shirts for some big winners, maybe. I've got all kinds of cool swag. So we would love to give you some cool stuff. And not just swag. I mean, like real real survival equipment from Grimm. So I've got some great stuff we'd love to give away. We'd love to send out some care packages. So please send us an email with anything at all. And the best anything at all gets free stuff. How's that?
I'll take that over a bag full of cats any day. So
Any day. I don't, I'm sorry if you're a cat person, but I just like, you know, like dogs have people and cats have staff. You know what I mean? Like they just, I don't know. I'm not, although I probably do need to buy some barn cats. That's pretty popular in my area. It keeps the mice population down, but you can't get attached to them. You don't want to give them a name.
that's too true that cats have staff and dogs have people.
They
But
have staff.
if you're a cat person, you're probably not trying to shove it into a bag in the first place.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. So let's get started. Chris, I don't have as much experience with suppressors as you, and I'd like to learn a little bit about that. I think there are people that own suppressors that maybe you could give them a couple of tips and tricks and things they might not know, and maybe just people thinking about getting one or getting into it that probably just don't know anything about it. So, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, and whether you're trying to gear up for hunting season or competition or just kind of building out your bug out plan rifle, all of these are going to be kind of tips and tricks and skills. We're not going to so much go into a specific gun this time, but these are all kind of the fundamentals, and some of it's higher level, some of it's more basic, but you'll get something out of this episode. So, starting off with suppressors, cans. They do a lot of things to a gun ballistically, believe it or not. It is not just an 8-inch piece of aluminum hanging off the end of your barrel to act as a counterweight. When you fire through a suppressor, and I'm speaking in general terms because there are some exotics out there like the OSS. It's built like a jet engine in reverse, so there are no baffles. But in general, when you're talking about a suppressor, it is a series of baffles that each one acts as a brake and slows down the gas as it comes out of the muzzle. Each baffle you have. So it slows it down, it increases the what's called dwell time, that gas stays in a chamber so it's cannot expand, which that expanding gas is what sets off that loud boom that you actually hear. You still hear the boom. They're not the it's not movie quiet. It never is. But you can significantly reduce the report and the actual sound effect off of just about any firearm, so long as you have the right suppressor. This is good for a variety of reasons. If you are hunting, it's not going to scare up all of the game when you take your first shot. It's also not going to damage your hearing as much. I will not say that it won't damage your hearing, because it definitely can, but it's not going to damage your hearing as much if you're using a suppressor. The other cool thing about it is because of that dwell time and the longer the gas is staying behind the bullet rather than dissipating into open air, you actually do see an uptick in your muzzle velocity. Well, that translates to when you fire a round, it's coming out of the barrel faster. It's going to stay in its most stable flight configuration for a longer range. Therefore, you get an extra 3 to sometimes 700 meters, basically 350 to 800 yards of distance out of a suppressor. Depends on the suppressor, depends on the bullet, depends on the rifle, all kinds of stuff like that. But you can get some enhanced, increased range by using a suppressor on the end of your barrel. It's a slight uptick in your feet per second, but it's going to shift your point of impact downrange. The other really cool thing about suppressors is they mitigate the felt backblast or the felt recoil and the overpressure in an area. Specifically, if you're talking about firing indoors, such as a home protection, somebody breaks in the middle of the night and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you grab your gun, it's going to be super loud. It's going to wake up you, the baby, the dog, everybody in the neighborhood. Everybody's going to know what's going on. And it's very confusing when you shock your system into something like that. Whereas the suppressor, it's going to be louder. Everyone inside of the house is still going to probably be awake, but it's not as big of a shock. So you can get second, third, fourth follow on shots on target to stop a home invader before everyone is shook awake and you've got more chaos going on.
It's going to wake up everybody in the house, but not wake up all of the dust on every piece of furniture you've ever owned.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about, I've heard so much about this like subsonic ammo versus regular ammo and how imperative it is to use subsonic ammo with a suppressor. Is it really that much of a difference? Does it depend on caliber? Like, I guess you really don't get a lot of rifle calibers that are subsonic because it's just not going to go that far, right?
Well, subsonic primarily has, if it is subsonic ammo, it primarily has to do with being a heavier grain weight with less powder behind it. So it's intentionally not breaking the sound barrier. Right around 800 feet per second is what you expect to see out of something like 300 blackout subsonic. Now, the big thing with subsonic is it's great for hunting, and there's a weird difference between a defensive round that's moving supersonic as fast as you can get it there, it's on target, and a subsonic round. Subsonic, because it's heavier, it tends to smash through more things like brush, underbrush, drywall, versus a supersonic round is just going to zip through it and it may be deflected by it. You may change your point of impact because it's going so fast it bounces off of a tree branch. On the felt side of that, if you are downrange from it, the biggest thing about a suppressor is the crack thump. So if you are downrange of a firearm and you hear a crack and then a distant thump, that's the round passing over your head, breaking the sound barrier and snapping the air around you. And then that thump is the report off of the rifle that sent it. When you add in a suppressor, you take away most of that thump. If it's a subsonic round, now you're taking away the crack, and it's not a crack. It sounds more like a zip or a whiz. If it's a subsonic round and the right suppressor, it's like a whisper, but very, very fast.
Interesting. And I have heard this. I don't think I've ever been downrange of enough firearms, but I've heard that when you're using a suppressor, even if you are using supersonic ammo, it's harder to pinpoint where that crack came from when you're using a suppressor because that breaking of the sound barrier is kind of everywhere, right? It's as the that sound is coming off the bullet, not just the place that the bullet left, like a normal unsuppressed firearm, right?
Yeah, and so you'll still hear the crack, but it's harder to identify the thump because it's generally a lower frequency than the high-pitched crack that a rifle barrel has. So when you add in that suppressor, it just kind of dissipates that sound and spreads it out. So it's like hearing the backup beep 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 at a construction site. You know it's there, you're just not completely sure where. That's kind of what a suppressor does for target identification on the receiving end.
You know, it's interesting. I never thought about the fact that I always just thought, oh yeah, a subsonic round is just not going to go as far. But you're right. If you can make that heavier and still below the speed of sound, still below 739 miles an hour at standard pressure at sea level or whatever it is. I'm talking in aviator terms now. But if you just keep it below that speed of sound, you can make the bullet a lot heavier and it will still get to its destination. It may have a lot more downward angle when it gets there, but you can still get that there using more bullet weight, right?
You can, and you can deliver
That's interesting.
A lot of energy. So if you look at something like a 458 SOCOM round, 9 of them will fit into a standard NATO 5.56 magazine. But you can get 9 450 Bushmaster rounds in there that will feed and chamber off It's such a heavy bullet. It's like getting hit with a sledgehammer when
Yeah,
it makes impact.
it's the size of your thumb going downrange. So let's talk about downrange. We're gonna talk way too long, but I did just want to briefly go over something that everybody who's ever purchased a scope should know, but I think a lot of people just really don't. And that is the difference between MOA and MRAD. And that's something that I shoot millirad. I know you probably shoot a lot of MOA, Chris, but here's the difference. And you see that on your scope. A lot of times you'll buy a scope and on the side it'll say, 1 click, 1/4 MOA. And so what does that mean? And quickly, because I bet a lot of people do know this, and I don't just want to talk down to people like they're dumb, but uh, the difference between those two kinds of optics you can buy, a minute of angle and a milliradian. And these are used to measure angles for adjusting scope turrets and reticles, basically to compensate for bullet drop and wind drift. MOA is in inches, and that is 1 inch at 100 yards. And that's actually rounded. It's more like 1 inch precisely. It's 1.047 inches at 100 yards. So if you're familiar with that concept and use freedom fractions, you might like MOA. And a lot of scope adjustments are like in quarter MOA. So that means that every time you click that turret, then you're moving the bullet 1/4 inch at 100 yards, or about a 1/4 inch. And it's angular. So when you go out to 200 yards, now it's a 1/2 inch. When you go out to 400 yards, now it's an entire inch every time you click that. And milliradians, on the other hand, it's actually, if you think of a circle in 360 degrees, think of that circle in 1,000th of a circle. So every milliradian is 1,000th of a circle. So that's basically 1 milliradian is 0.36 degrees, I guess, if you do the math right. And that means that every milliradian is 3.6 inches at 100 yards. And so, generally speaking, you'll see scopes, they'll say every click is 1/10 of a milliradian. So, one click on that turret at 100 yards would be 0.36 inches. So, those are the two different types. A lot of people who do a lot of precision shooting, they go with milliradian just because it's simpler and people view it as more precise because the MOA system is rounded. But there are obviously, in the US military, it's MOA all day long and they're pretty darn accurate. So, I think a lot of that just comes down to personal preference and those kinds of things. I don't know, Chris, what do you think? I mean, for the most part, if you MRAD, you click, it's going to be 0.36 inches at 100 yards, and MOA, it's going to be 0.25 inches ish at 100 yards. But is there anything else you would add to those? Is there anything? I mean, I know you like MOA better, so.
I'm used to doing MOA more, so that's why I like it better. It's easier for me because that's what I was trained with. As long as you don't mix them up, you're fine. So minute
Right.
of angle is 1/60th of 1 degree. That's where the minute comes in.
Yep.
And it's 60 inches, 5 feet at 100 yards is one degree. So you're dividing that in 60. You've got roughly a 1 inch target at 100 yards. As long as you don't mix them up and try to do your calculations for MRAD using MOA or vice versa, you're going to be fine. Just pick a system and stick with it.
Right. And I'll say, I've got both systems on a bunch of different rifles. And yeah, it just sort of depends on the scope. Oftentimes, sometimes you may have an optic you like and it just doesn't come in one or the other. Most of them come in both. Most of the really long range stuff. On a lot of reticles, it's not just a crosshair when you're looking at these really long range reticles. And I know that with the reticle I use, it looks like a Christmas tree, but you can actually calculate range using the reticle. So if you had a 6-foot object, like a man-size object, then I know that that's going to be 500 yards. And you're basically taking two sides of the triangle and calculating the third at that point, if that makes sense. But you can actually do range estimation using reticles if you understand that MOA or milliradian system. And that's actually pretty cool, being able to calculate range based on what you see in the reticle.
It is, and it makes your shooting a lot faster, especially if you are big game hunting or do find yourself in a tactical situation where you have to engage others. No, I am not saying go out and do that for practice, but if you did end up in a situation like that or had to make a snapshot at distance, for the most part, as long as you can hit an 18-inch pie plate at whatever distance you're shooting at, you're okay. It's when you're starting to shoot at rabbits at 500 yards out, you've got to be a lot more precise or you're going to miss.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, when you go up and just hang steel in the hills and you're hitting a 2 foot gong at 1,000 yards, that's pretty fun to do. But it can get a whole lot more precise than that when you're actually, yeah, trying to say take small game at long ranges and things like that. And that's where the math really does come in. And speaking of math, uh, we were going to talk a little bit about like bullet grain weight, and this is interesting to me because I know like what weights of bullets certain firearms of mine like to eat, and I just sort of stick with that, but I really don't get into that a whole lot. And I always look at that and go, you know what, 180 grain, 190 grain, it's 10 grains, it's like it's no weight at all, it makes zero difference. But it's not the case, is it?
No, it's when you look at the difference between like 175 grain and 150 grain, if it's coming out of the same rifle, if it's coming out of the same caliber, like 150 grain 308 7.62 NATO versus 175 grain, those are going to perform extremely differently. Your heavier grain weights, they tend to need a lot tighter rifling. So you're looking at, instead of a 1 in 8 twist, maybe we're switching to a 1 in 7, or maybe even a 1 in 6.5. With your lighter rounds, they're exiting the barrel so fast. If you try to put that much spin on it, you're going to strip all of it away, and you're just keyholing the round. As soon as it leaves, it's going to start to tumble. So for your lighter rounds, you need a lot looser, like a 1 in 11 or 1 in 12 twist for your lighter grain bullets. The lighter ones are going to fly faster and flatter, and they're really good out to mid range, but they do get pushed around and kind of knocked over by wind quite a bit. So you have to compensate for your wind a lot more. The heavier ones, by contrast, are going to go slower, but they stay stable in their flight configuration, their flight path, for a longer amount of time. So it takes them longer to start to wobble and then go transonic and then subsonic before impact. The biggest thing that you need to know here is your rifle and the load. So this is where I'm pretty sure I still have my dope book from the Army, but having what's called a dope book, data of previous engagement, it lets you fill out what temperature was it, how far were you shooting, what was the ambient temperature and dew point and humidity and wind speed, and where did you hit, where were you shooting, you know, did you have to adjust zero, was everything a first round hit? And the more information that you collect in there, kind of the broader profile you can get to go back and look at, so that, oh, it's 68 degrees, light winds out of the northeast, and I know roughly where I'm shooting. So I know what my hold off is, and I can make that shot even faster and more accurate.
It's interesting talking about bullet grains because it's just such a small. I mean, so one grain is like 1/10,000th of a pound.
You won't feel the difference when you hold them in your hand.
You couldn't, and you're talking about, yeah, you could hold a bullet that's 15 or 20 grains heavier, and you wouldn't know the difference in your hand. You wouldn't, but it can make such a huge difference. It's just funny when you talk about that. You're talking about 1/10,000th of a pound, and you're like, oh man, 180 grain, that's a light load. 100 or 210 grain, that's really heavy. And you're talking about something that's a somewhere around 1,000th of a pound or something difference. Like it's crazy to think about that.
As a point of reference, a standard 9mm 115 grain NATO 9mm parabellum round exits the barrel of my handgun, my preferred one, at about 1,080 to 1,090 feet per second, right? That's 115 grains.
Mm-hmm.
The defensive rounds that I use are 80 grain, and it exits the barrel at around 1,300 feet per second. So it's getting there a lot faster, and those rounds are designed to stop an engine block out of a 9mm, so I'll take it.
That's crazy. That's nuts. Yeah, talking about bullet grains, and it is like you said, it's just knowing exactly what your gun is happy with and finding that bullet grain and finding a bullet that is built in that, grain weight and it's the right size and your gun likes to eat it. I'll give you, it's interesting, you're talking about having you know, a bigger twist on lighter bullets. My long range rifle it's chambered in 300 Win Mag. It likes to shoot a 220 grain bullet, which is pretty heavy for 300 Win Mag. I don't know if there's a heavier 300 Win Mag out there, but it's got a 1 in 10 twist. So it's just interesting because the gun was just built to eat that particular bullet weight with that particular twist. And we're talking about long range, obviously, not pistols. It makes, I think, a lot less difference when you're talking about a very short range. When you're talking about 11, 12, 1,300 yards getting out there, then it makes a huge difference.
And my long range gun is a 308, and it's a 1 in 10 twist that I feed 180 grain through.
Mm-hmm. Which is also pretty heavy for a 308.
It's extremely heavy for a 308. Yep. You don't see 30 caliber 180 grains in anything less than 300 Win Mag, but I hand load them and
right.
I'm happy with it.
Yeah. So let's talk about I want to talk about some cool long rangey stuff. And this is something that I learned going to a long range shooting school that I think a lot of people, even if you do shoot long range often, you may not know. And when you're out, doping that target, this is something you actually need to know, believe it or not. And it's which direction you're shooting. And this is important. It's the craziest thing. And this all revolves around Coriolis force. And I bet a lot of people know about this, but I bet there are people listening that don't. And I just think it's really cool because it's very mathy and sciencey, but I just really like the science behind that when you're shooting north or south, and we're talking about in the Northern Hemisphere, this actually matters. This is like, reverse flush Australian toilet math.
Coriolis effect is one of my favorite things.
It's the craziest
so cool.
thing, dude. And so when you are in the Northern Hemisphere and you're shooting north or south, the Coriolis effect causes a bullet's trajectory to drift to the right. And this is due to the Earth's rotation. The Earth is spinning eastward and you're on it. And this is like Einstein's law of relativity stuff, where the Earth is rotating one direction and the magnitude of that drift increases with the distance and latitude. It's the craziest thing. So as the Earth rotates eastward, right, the bullet is fired and it initially has this eastward velocity because it's traveling on the planet as you pull the trigger. And so as the bullet travels north or south, it's not rotating with the Earth at the same speed as the target, because that target is still rotating towards the east. And that target being at a different latitude has this slightly different eastward velocity. It's crazy to think about that matters. And this does matter. You got to get, this is outside of 1,000 yards. This is, I have noticed this when you start to get out to that 1,200 yard mark. But you get
this is not your standard just Sunday range. This is the long range stuff. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So like if you're shooting towards the south, when you're shooting south, that target is moving faster east than the bullet, and that causes the bullet to appear to drift to the right again when you're in the Northern Hemisphere, if that makes sense. So it's just the craziest thing. So here's the simplest way to talk about that is when you're shooting north south or south north in the Northern Hemisphere, a bullet fired north or south will be deflected to the right. So the horizontal component of that Coriolis effect is at its maximum at the poles and 0 at the equator. And then when you're shooting east to west or west to east in the northern hemisphere, it still matters because the bullet fired east will actually appear to hit slightly high on your target, and a bullet fired west will hit slightly low, because when you're shooting east, the earth is moving away from the bullet. Your target is actually moving away, and we're shooting from east to west. The target is getting closer to the bullet. They're converging on each other. So it's just the craziest thing. This is that Coriolis effect. And it's just that that vertical component is pretty strong, like at the equator, and that diminishes as you get closer to these poles. It's the craziest thing. But did I explain that pretty much right, Chris?
Yeah, if you think about the bullet as a rocket ship, when it's in the gun, when it's in your hands, when it's you are still attached to the ground or attached to something that is attached to the ground, it is part of the ground. As soon as it leaves the barrel, it is its own independent object. It has its own wildly different trajectory. And if you are shooting to the east, your target is trying to run away from that bullet. So the
Right?
longer it's in the air, the lower on the target it's going to hit. When
Yeah.
you're shooting west, the higher it's going to hit.
Right.
And
Because
it's
you're
just that time and
calculating for
flight.
that bullet drop, and the target is either getting closer to you or moving further away from you when you're shooting east to west. So it actually matters. Like if you're going to shoot long distance, you need to have a compass with you. And it actually matters which direction you're shooting to and shooting from. And I guess the simplest way, I mean, this is kind of Einstein's theory of relativity, but next time you get in an elevator, jump up and down. Like,
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
yeah, if you're going from a high floor to a low floor, you will jump and you will have a longer hang time. If you're going from a low floor to a high floor and you jump in the elevator, you won't be off the ground very long. That's kind of a pretty simple way to do it. I travel a lot. I'm in a lot of hotel elevators. I jump up and down a lot, so that's just how it works in my head, I guess.
I can just see the people at the pool like, oh no, this
Yeah.
guy.
Oh man, he's in the elevator again. So, but anyway, that's literally that's relativity. That's how it works, is that the bullet, when it is in the gun, it's traveling at the same speed as the target. And when it leaves the gun, the target is moving in a slightly different direction than the bullet. And because of Coriolis effect, it matters which direction you're shooting. That's just crazy to me. But I've noticed it firsthand. And anybody that's shot long range may not have noticed it. And maybe the next time you went out, you were overcompensating because you were shooting a different direction and you just didn't know.
That does happen. And usually it doesn't happen until you get out to, you're talking 1,000 meters, 1,200 meters.
In excess of 1,000 yards, for sure, it probably doesn't matter.
When you start to get into that mile-long range, that's where you can really notice it. And it does make a big difference. At 1,600 meters, which is right at a mile, 5,280 feet for the freedom fraction people, your drift, depending on your latitude, can be as much as 12 feet.
That's crazy.
So
it's a ton.
It's a very big difference. That's not just I missed the kill zone and now it's bleeding everywhere. It's I missed entirely and now it's gone. Whatever you were hunting is gone.
That's nuts. So, Chris, let's talk about some like tips and tricksy things. What do you got?
Well, I want to touch on one that not a lot of people realize, and it goes along with the Coriolis effect. So this is something that you can, if you've got a solid ballistic calculator on your phone, or you can run projections through, even ChatGPT will draw you up a basic ballistic table. But angle of depreciation or high angle shooting. So if you shoot up or down, that can have a similar effect to the Coriolis effect. If you shoot up or down, you're always going to hit high. And it's a weird phenomenon, but if you think of the ballistic arc, where you are shooting, if you're shooting at an upward angle, that ballistic arc, by the time it gets to the target, is on a higher trajectory, so it hits high on the target. If you're shooting low, then you are cutting off that ballistic trajectory early, and therefore you're hitting high.
Oh, sure. Yeah, okay.
So that's one of those little tips and tricks that not a lot of people realize. I think as far as an actual tip that you can use, something that we did in sniper school all the time was take a small piece of 550, only about 4 inches long, tie it in a loop, and slip it over the barrel all the way down to where the chassis meets the barrel. This only works on free floated rifles. It's not going to work on your AR 15 or your AK. Don't worry about it. Those are probably not long range enough to do this, anyways. But if you've got something like a hunting rifle or a long range precision rifle, take a piece of 550, tie it into a little 4-inch loop, and drag it all the way back to the base of the chassis. When you are mucking around in the mud, blood, sweat, dust, rust, whatever, and you need to take a shot, that debris inside of the chassis channel, if it's touching your barrel, it can actually throw off the barrel harmonics. Totally. You can go down the rabbit hole on barrel harmonics for an hour. At least
This
I
is
could.
like the dollar bill trick that I've been shown at the range before, right?
Yes, this is the dollar bill trick amped up and on steroids, so you can grab it with gloves. But you want that chassis to be completely free from the barrel so it's not touching anything. So what we would do is put that 550 cord all the way at the base, and then before we would shoot, we would rip it off, and it would just clean out everything in the chassis. So we had a completely free barrel, and it's not throwing off the shot one direction or another.
And when you're saying chassis, for some people, you mean the stock, right?
Yes,
The
stock
thing that the barrel
chassis.
sits in.
The nice ones are kind of the stock or the chassis-less stocked rifles. Those are fun.
Right, but so for people to understand, basically, you've got your rifle has basically two big giant parts. There's a big metal part that has the barrel attached to it, and then there is probably not a metal part that is what Chris is calling the chassis, or some people call the stock. But at the end of that stock, where you would normally maybe put your hand to stabilize the rifle, that isn't supposed to touch the barrel. The stock and the barrel aren't supposed to touch each other. And like Chris is saying, when you're out in the bush running around with the rifle, then yeah, it can get clogged, that area, just the little area where basically where the barrel sticks out of the stock or the chassis. And so Chris is saying you can take a piece of paracord and kind of shove it down in there, and then it allows you to clear the gunk out of that when you need to take a shot. And yeah, this is the barrel harmonics discussion that we do not have enough time today to go over, but it's crazy that the harmonics of that barrel matter, and it's crazy. We start talking long range and people get way into the weeds with this. Obviously, we're just scratching the surface here, so it is nuts.
Yeah, I could go on about the 4 dimensions of twists and barrel harmonics
Yeah.
for days.
Yeah, and some people will find it interesting and some people won't.
They'll be asleep by minute 40.
We're trying to keep it entertaining. One thing I want to talk about when we talk about long range shooting is also what they say, I'm using quotation fingers, calling the wind. And this is one that's interesting to me because there's some science, but there's like a lot of people that just, it's almost luck, where they can look downrange and say, oh, because of the way that grass is blowing, or I see smoke blowing, I know exactly how fast the wind is going at your target, or something like that. And that's what they call calling the wind. And in long range shooting, it's this complex process that involves like a combination of observation and equipment and experience, honestly, to determine how the wind will affect the bullet's trajectory. So there's a couple of little tips and tricks that I can give you, mostly tech, to help this, but you really can't just guess. So experienced shooters, they can often get a really good estimate by feeling the wind on their face, or like watching the vegetation downrange. And a lot of people use an anemometer or a wind meter. Kestrel is the one that makes like the ones for shooting. They've got some very cool shooting centric anemometers.
That's the thing that Mark Wahlberg had in Shooter, that he was sitting
Yeah.
there reading while he
Yeah.
was scouting positions,
Yeah,
right?
that's exactly right. Kestrel makes one that has a bunch, and you can basically take that wind and then load it into like a bullet calculator, a calculator on your phone or any of those apps to kind of get a better idea of where that point of impact will be. But the wind is almost never blowing at a perfect 90-degree angle to your barrel. So you need to determine the direction the wind is coming from to figure out what they call the wind value. And you can use that clock system. So your target is always at 12 o'clock. And then wind coming from 3 or 9 o'clock would be what you call full value wind. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. I have an anemometer. It's something by X-Tech that I like that has it's got a little standard tripod mount on the bottom. And so what I can do is put that on a small tripod and then put that anemometer right next to me when I'm shooting, but above what you'd call your wind shear level. So it can't be sitting level with your eye because your head is blocking the wind that hits the anemometer. You need that little wind dial to be kind of up above any of the stuff around you that would block the wind. So you get that up a little bit, get it, a foot above you. If you're lying prone, you can have that thing just slightly above your head, and you put that at a 90-degree angle to your rifle, which makes the little screen look right at you. And then you get a really good idea of what the relative wind is. You don't have to calculate that wind angle because you're only seeing the wind as it hits at that 90-degree angle. So that's something you can do to call the wind. Now, a couple other things. I found these, and I've seen people use them in shooting before, Chris. I don't know if you ever have, but if you go, I'm not kidding, like the golfing websites or the Frisbee, the Disc Golf Association sells these, where they sell these little weighted flags. Have you ever seen these?
I haven't.
It's crazy. I've got one, and I'll show you. Basically what it is it's 3 little flags. One says 6, one says 12, one says 18. And they are weighted. And however fast the wind is going is which one of those things picks up. And they use them in Frisbee golf all the time. And so I bought one of these, and when I go out shooting and I'm setting up to go long range shooting, I'll go put one of those at my target. That way I've got my anemometer close to me. I know what my wind is there, but then the wind at the target can be vastly different. So I set this little Frisbee golf flag up, and you get an idea of what the wind is doing downrange based on this little Frisbee golf flag. They're the coolest thing. So it's got 3 little weights on these 3 different little tiny flags, and then based on which color is flying, you know how fast and the wind direction.
I'm definitely going to have to look into that.
Crazy analog. Now, here is the pro tip. This is the post-apocalyptic urban area, urban environment you're shooting and trying to call the wind. You're probably familiar with wind socks that they have at airports or at helipads and on parking garages and hospitals.
The bright orange ones.
The bright orange, they're actually white and orange striped usually. And if you've ever, just like it, that's what they use at the airport because everything's white and orange striped for some reason at the airport. Like that's the safety airport colors. I should know this because I'm a pilot. But this is how you read a windsock. That white and orange striped windsock is striped for a reason. And this is probably something you don't even know, Chris, because it isn't actually shooting related, but it's going to be in the apocalypse. That it's actually got 5 stripes on it. There's 3 orange and 2 whites. And every stripe is 3 knots of wind. So when you look at a windsock, a white and orange striped windsock, and they're all sold by the same company and they're like FAA approved, but you see them anywhere you're going to land a helicopter, you'll often see these white and orange striped ones. And they are weighted in such a way that you can call the wind and direction. So a fully erect windsock is 15 knots of wind. And a totally droopy one with just one little piece of it up is 3 knots of wind.
See, now I want to go and hijack the wind socks at the local airport and replace them with traffic cones so they think it's just high wind all the time.
Exactly. But that's
just to be, malicious.
They're actually I take that back. They're not weighted. It's actually Venturi effect because they're wider at one end and skinnier at the other end. And it's all the science on those is all based, I think, on Venturi. I don't know if it's weight, but yeah, if it's a white and orange and then it droops, you have 6 knots of wind. If it's fully, full salute one direction, you have more than 15 knots of wind.
So
Isn't that kind of cool?
Full salute means live fast, die hard, right?
That's right. Yeah, and I think, the reason they do that lots of in general aviation, if you've got a 15 knot direct crosswind component, that's a pretty quick wind. I mean, a lot of pilots will not want to fly in a 17 mile an hour direct crosswind in a, Cessna 150. It's just really tough to get the airplane on the ground when you've got that much wind. So I imagine that's kind of why they cap it at 15 knots or, somewhere around 17 miles an hour. But yeah, so every one of those stripes on a general aviation windsock is 3 knots. So if you're in an urban environment where you can see the helipad somewhere at the hospital or the helipad on the parking garage at the mall, Walking Dead style, then you could actually pretty reliably call the wind.
See, and when you said urban shooting at first, I was like, you don't call the wind in an urban environment, not when you're shooting between those concrete canyons.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, I wasn't talking about like a mount facility. I was talking about an apocalyptic scenario where you're downtown Memphis shooting your neighbors.
Not quite tall enough buildings, but it's close. The thing about an urban environment, if it's truly an urban cityscape like downtown New York, downtown Boston, Baltimore, anywhere where there's a lot of high-rise buildings, and if you live in one of these areas, you'll know what I'm talking about. When you walk down the street, it can be no wind whatsoever, and then as soon as you hit the intersection, you get blindsided by like a 60 mile an hour gust. And we call them, in the long-range shooting world, we call them concrete canyons, and the wind can change radically and be going from block to block, quite literally 180 degrees different from itself.
Right. It's wind shear. The wind is bouncing off all kinds of stuff in that concrete jungle.
And it acts like a funnel in a lot of cases and will push a lot harder than the actual wind speed is, just based on pressure differentials. So it's really weird when you start shooting in an urban environment, but hopefully it never comes to that. I did want to say another thing about zeroing. If you're going to zero your rifle, zero from your field position. What I mean by that is if you're going to be out laying in the grass waiting for something to come by like an elk, don't zero your rifle from the bench. Zero it from a prone position. If you're going to be in a tree stand, zero from the bench position. If you are duck hunting and have something like an adjustable optic on your shotgun, zero that from a standing position. Whatever you're comfortable with and whatever position you're going to be shooting from, because even the small changes in your body can make a big difference on where that shot goes.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Lastly, we're getting close to the end. There's a couple of pieces of tech that are very inexpensive that anybody can add to a longer range rifle setup, and they will make a difference. And the one, I may ask you to take the other one, Chris, because it does get very technical, but the one is the bubble level and the other one's the angle finder. And these are pretty inexpensive. You can get very expensive ones. But I'll give you an example with me. I am right-handed. I'm right eye dominant. I'm a right eye shooter. And so when I have my big long range rifle with my big long range optic, I have an angle finder, which literally is giving you a little angle within 5 degrees up or down. It's just like a level pointed the other way. And I have a bubble level, and they're both coming off when I'm looking down the optic, they're coming off the left side of the rifle, of the scope actually, and on the rail itself. So what that means is when I'm laying there prone, I've got my left eye closed, I'm looking down the optic. If I open my left eye, I am looking into all that garbage. I'm looking into my angle finder and looking into my bubble level with my left eye. And your brain is really cool about making stuff real. And what happens when you do that is your brain will superimpose both of those things that you're seeing very up close in your left eye sort of over the reticle in your optic. And so I can open my eyes, both eyes, and I can easily see if I am level in both axes, I will call that. And what that does, the bubble level is the big one, because what it does is if you are level, meaning side to side level, it eliminates that cant error, and it's CANT without the apostrophe, the cant error. And what cant error does is if your rifle and then your scope, because it's mounted level on your rifle, is canted one direction or the other ever so slightly, every click you make to that turret, every adjustment you make to that scope isn't going left or right or up or down. It's going at some ever so slight angle. So if I'm on a target and I say, you know what, I need to come left 3 clicks, and I click left 3 clicks, if I'm not perfectly level, then those 3 clicks aren't going to be on the horizontal plane. They are going to be slightly canted. And so by having this very inexpensive bubble level that's level on the scope, I open my left eye and I say, oh, look, that optic is perfectly centered, and then I can make my adjustments. Or, oh, look, it's not. And I can rotate the rifle on that roll axis ever so slightly until I see the bubble level completely leveled in my left eye, and I can close my left eye and go back to shooting. Does that make sense?
It does. And to put it simply, whichever direction, left or right, the top of your scope is pointed, that's the side that your round is going to hit on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And so you can spend a lot of money on bubble levels, or you can spend a little money on bubble levels. And I have the expensive one. Is it any better than the $30 one on Amazon? I can't tell you. I mean, it's probably not for as good as I am of a shot. It probably isn't, but you can get kind of an all-in-one I've seen for like $30. It'll attach to your any scope or your rail, and they have angle indicator and this bubble level. And that angle indicator, Chris, I think they call it a cosine indicator, like it's ADI, ACI or something. Is that what they
It
call
is.
them?
It's based on the same technology as like 16th century sextants for navigation on the water. So it's a super, super old school technique. But what it is, it's telling you if your rifle if is actually holding level. And if it's attached to the scope, it's telling you that your scope, where your entrance and exit are, the center of those is perfectly lined up and level. And what the angle indicator tells you is how far up or down of an angle you are shooting at, so that you can better compensate for, you're going to hit high. Well, now how high? So anytime you're shooting up or down, you're going to hit your target high. That's what you're.
Isn't that weird? That's so counterintuitive. You would think that if you're shooting up, the bullet would drop, but it was like you were saying, that bullet is still on its upward trajectory. So it's super counterintuitive. And yeah, I guess that takeaway is that when you're shooting at a steep angle, either uphill or downhill, your bullet will impact higher than it would if you're shooting flat. So it's important to know how much of an angle that is, up or down, right?
Yep, precisely. And
it's crazy.
The cheat code to that is shoot as if you're on completely level ground. However far it is horizontally, that's what you shoot at.
Oh, really? That's interesting. That's a great hack. Say that again.
That's your cheat code. Whatever, if you're shooting at an upward or downward angle, you want to eliminate the angle from your calculations. Assume that however far away that target is, if you were on the exact same level, that's what you want to shoot at. So if it's 200 yards away and you're shooting downward at a 15-degree angle, you may be high by as much as 5 to 7 inches. But if you calculate for, it's 200 meters out, I take that angle out, and now I can hit.
That's interesting. And I think the easiest way to think about that shooting up or down angle is this, that gravity always pulls the bullet straight down towards the center of the earth. That's where gravity comes from. On a flat horizontal shot, that force is acting at a straight 90-degree angle on the bullet's flight path. So it causes what they call maximum drop relative to that line of sight. But when you shoot in an angle, gravity is no longer acting at a perfect 90 degrees to the bullet's path. So instead, a portion of that gravitational force is now acting either to slow it down like an uphill shot or speed it up like a downhill shot. And there's a smaller component of gravity pulling down on the bullet, right? Does that make sense?
Exactly. And it is the exact amount of change of the angle of your shot. So if you're shooting upwards at 15 degrees, that means it's pulling down at a 15-degree angle reverse to your trajectory. So it gets a little bit tricky with the math when you're trying to work it out on the fly.
Right, but you don't have to do that, right? There's so many cool apps and bullet calculators and all kinds of stuff out there.
Yep.
So go get an app. And Chris, I know you've used the Hornady app before. It's kind of Hornady centric. I've used one called Straylock, and I'll post a link to that. It's not cheap for an app, but I want to say it's like $9 or $10 or something. But it allows every single piece of math we've thrown at you. It allows you to enter into that app, and it will tell you where you're going to shoot if you're as good as the gun. It's crazy. So you can, in this app, you say, here's how far away I am from the target, and here's what my relative wind is doing, and here's which direction I'm shooting, and here's the altitude I'm shooting from, and here's the angle I'm shooting from. You just enter it in the app, and it says, here's where you should put the little X, and here's where the bullet will go. So
you can do some crazy things with the Straylock app. Yeah.
You can do some crazy stuff with any of these bullet drop calculators and apps they have for long range shooting. So you don't need to do it all on the fly, but it's cool to be able to. And that's why some of these guys that shoot so long range, I'm just so blown away by, because they're doing this kind of math in their head that I'm pretty decent at, and I'm nowhere near some of these professional shooters, because they really are just mathematicians doing this long range calculation with all these different very crazy variables and things like wind. That's like an unknown variable sometimes.
I will say there is no other feeling than pulling a brand new rifle out of the box and hitting 1,000 yards with iron sights without zeroing it.
Oh, wow.
That's fun.
And that's what they call cold shot accuracy as well, right?
Yes, that's also a very nice rifle that I bought, because it was zeroed at the factory and I didn't have to worry about it. But
what is your big long-rangey rifle, Chris?
So right now I'm using a Ruger American with a 4-14x44 Vortex optic on it.
Mm-hmm.
I like it because it is super lightweight. It does have a threaded barrel, so I can throw on a suppressor or a muzzle brake. I love the optic and just how fast and maneuverable that rifle is. The one downside is the magazine. I'm not a huge fan of how it connects, and I have to load a new mag, but I can get past that because it's only 5 rounds and I'm using it for hunting.
Is that a Ruger Precision?
It's not the Precision. So the Ruger American is a series of rifles, and they do make the Precision as well, but the Precision is all about the stock or the chassis, versus this is more of a well-rounded all-around hunting rifle.
Okay.
So it doesn't have the adjustable cheek riser and the adjustable length of pull and the adjustable trigger and the adjustable everything that you get with the Precision package. This is more of almost a ranch rifle. But
okay.
I keep it in 308 so that I can take down almost anything in North America if I had to.
Nice.
What about you? What's your long range shooter?
I have a 300 Win Mag. This is a rifle they don't make anymore, and it was made by a company in Idaho. I think, Chris, you and I have talked about this a little bit before, but basically it's it's kind of their Secret Service rifle. It was built for the Secret Service. They call it the Secret Service Chamber, and it's PWS is the company. But a lot of people probably know them. They make really good stuff now, but they don't make this what they call the Mark III anymore. And I want to say they made like 50 of them, and I've got serial number 50. Like, they just didn't make that many, and it was an awesome rifle. It was a little overpriced because it wasn't really their forte, but it's amazing. It is very heavy. It's an extremely long range. I've got that. It's Vortex. I want to say it's their. It's funny you shoot a Vortex too, but I want to say it's their AMG. It's like a 4.5 to 27 power with a 56 millimeter optic, and
So you're reaching out there.
the rifle's better than me. I would say that. Yeah, it's definitely a sub MOA rifle, and the rifle is better than I am. But it is fun to go out and shoot really long range. I really do enjoy that. And yeah, it really is. It's the math. You're doing a lot of math. You have to be very calm to do it, right? You have to be in the right mindset to do it. You can't be all jacked up on Red Bull and go sit there at the range and think you're gonna, land an accurate shot, because at that point, when you start talking about getting out there to 1,500 yards, you're literally, like shooting between heartbeats and things like that. So I just really enjoy that really long range shooting, because there is just so much math and skill that goes into it. I think it's a cool skill to have. And I'm not really a hunter. I don't do that to put food on the table. I'm just doing that because I really like to, shoot extremely long distances, because it's just crazy to think about. You're putting something the size of your finger in downrange at, almost a mile. It's just nuts.
It's a great way to clear your head. And
Yeah.
because you have to focus on so much other stuff, and you are entirely in control of it. You can have a good day at the range or a bad day at the range.
Right.
That's all up to you. But
Yeah, exactly. So I think we talked a lot about shooting. I would like to hear from people. Do they like the guns episode? Because there's just so many places that you can go out there and talk about guns. There's so many podcasts and doomcasts out there that will just talk about guns all day long, and we just really don't. But I think there are some cool tips and tricks and some tech, some things, some inexpensive things that we can bring to the table and up your shooting game a little bit. So it's fun to talk about every once in a while.
it really is. I think we are about wrapped up for this week. I definitely want to invite you back for next week. We have some of probably the most real and raw encounters with disasters next week coming up. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. But until then, remember, you are your own stakeholder.